Good afternoon and welcome to the Women's Collective South Africa, our YouTube series called The Protection Paradigm. Today we are talking about menstruation and all things glorious attached to it. This topic was presented to us, suggested to us by a lovely young lady, Girisha, who is presenting it as her dissertation for her master's. And I'll get Giri to introduce our topic a little bit more and share the basic outline of what we're going to be discussing today. Over to you, Giri.
Hi, everyone. Hare Krishna. I just want to firstly say thank you so much to the Women's Collective for kind of believing in this topic and realizing the seriousness, in it. And, capital of ladies that are gathered here today. And I just hope that everyone just freely, shares their thoughts, shares their ideas on this topic without, any fear or shame about it. And yeah, so for those of you who don't know me, as Rasa-sthali mentioned, I'm Girisha, and I'm currently doing my master's in research psychology. And the topic of menstruation is also something throughout my, academic years that somehow came to me, and it has kind of spurred my interest. And I come from a standpoint of deep curiosity, on it, because of the difference in the academic environment when you learn about it, and the difference, when you learn about it at home and from friends. And so this, I've done it in my honors year, and now I'm currently doing it in my master's year. And it was through this process of really intense, research, and I hadn't realized until that intense period of research into the topic, the extent to which it impacts a woman's psychology and a woman's identity, and their mental health in general. And so, menstruation generally is kind of the first way that we identify ourselves as women. And so I feel that it's often seen in a negative light, and I hope that by this discussion today, we can kind of reframe those common negative connotations that we hear about menstruation, and that it's something that you never have to be ashamed about, that we can make you feel that way through this discussion, and that we can, and that you can. And yeah, I just want to show you guys through this discussion that there's another side, there's another side to menstruation than what we all see it as. And I hope to dispel all the myths and the confusion that we often hear. And yeah, that's just a little nutshell of how I came to this. Yeah. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Giri, for that lovely introduction. And what I picked up was the women's psychology surrounding menstruation, and whether it's positive and negative. And I think a good way to explore that option is, maybe we've got some devotees who have joined us today, and I think it's a great thing to hear their stories. So can I start with Mathura Mandal? Is that okay, Mathura? Okay, so let me just quickly introduce Mathura Mandal. Mathura Mandal is a good friend of mine. She is a spirited woman. She is the person who had conceived of the Women's Collective, and we're just so honored to hear from you and hear your story and experience of menstruation. So just to remind everybody, we're going to be sharing what our first experiences of menstruation was, and how it has transformed over the years. So over to you, Mathura.
Thanks, Rasa-sthali. And I'm so glad that Girisha brought this topic up. And one important thing that she mentioned was the mental aspect of it. And, putting it out there and the psychological aspect, because, we tend to hide things as women, and menstruation being one of them. My story, gosh, goes back years and years ago. I got my period at 14. My information came from my group of friends, because it was never discussed at home. So you hear bits and pieces and you're a little bit confused, like what's going on, something's going to be happening to your body, but you're not exactly sure what, because it's not discussed at home. But then you get to school and you learn a bit in biology, but it's still theory. I got my period at about 15, and I thought I was lucky because I'd get a period maybe twice a year. So I thought, this is great, I'm not sure what the big fuss is about. And so for me, menstruation became about physical health. When I got married, and then I decided, we decided time to have a baby, and I couldn't fall pregnant. And that's when I wanted to get a period every month, but I couldn't, because I have a wonderful disease called polycystic ovarian syndrome. And it's a horrible disease to have, because you have all these cysts in your ovaries, and that basically prevents you from having a regular period. And when I was younger, I thought it was great, but as I got older, it wasn't so great. And combined with polycystic ovarian syndrome comes a whole lot of side effects, like high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and high insulin levels. So I had to, start treating the polycystic ovaries, or having all these cyst blasts in my ovaries for me to get a period, and then go into all this medication. And it was a great learning experience. So, when something goes wrong when you're younger, and if you speak about it, you can get help sooner. I waited too long. And the funny thing is, when I turned 40, I started getting a regular period. Every month, 28 days, because I was on the right medication then. So my best years were like no period. And when I'm supposed to be going into my years of menopause, I start getting a regular period. So my situation is a little bit in reverse.
That's thank you, Mathura, for sharing your story. It's I'm sorry that you had to go through what you had to go through. For those of you that may not know, we can happily say that Mathura did manage to have a wonderful son. So at least we know that got sorted out, Mathura. And we will come back to those. Okay, maybe I can just ask you quickly, when you weren't getting your period, like everybody else in that 28-day cycle, it did not occur to you that that was something unusual or something you should be concerned about?
No, it wasn't, because at 17, I moved into the ashram, and it was great not having a period, because I could do so much more service, and I didn't have to say those awful words. I'm off the altar, when I never got onto the altar in the first place. And I never turned the lamp away. I could always offer flowers to Srila Prabhupada. And I couldn't understand, these ladies wouldn't touch the lamp or offer flowers, and I could do it all the time, which was great. And, by the way, even when I had my period, I'd still do it, because nobody knew. Oops,
so you're a bit of a rebel.
I was a rebel back then, yes.
So Mathura, when you were in the ashram and not getting your period, so none of the women asked you, Mathura, what's going on? Are you okay? Did that conversation not happen, or just everybody celebrated the fact that you were not getting your monthly period?
No, because, again, based in an ashram, women don't speak about getting their period. It's taboo. You don't go around and say, I got my period. Nobody spoke about it.
Except
there
the
was no-
entire temple does know when you have your period, because you're standing there against the wall during Tulsi Puja while everybody's circumambulating Tulsi. So it's an announcement.
Just a few women will know. The men are busy on the other side, so they're not concerned. And there was no one to come to you to say, hey, listen, you're going around month in, month out, and when are you getting your period? So to me, it was no big deal.
Okay. So there's a lack of awareness.
Complete lack of awareness. And, in hindsight, it should have been caught earlier. If I was made more, or if I knew or had enough information, I would have sought help.
Okay, so we will come back to
But I thought this is great because I can just do service.
So we will come back to the ISKCON cultures surrounding menstruation, and I think that's going to be quite a big topic. But I'd like to move over to Kalpa-latika. Kalpa-latika is a young Vaishnavi who lives in the Gauteng area, and she's very bravely decided to join our conversation on menstruation. And Kalpa-latika, I'd like to start off with your experience, your first experience with menstruation, and subsequently growing up into adulthood, and how, if that has transformed, and yeah, if you can share your story with us, please.
Sure. Hare Krishna. So my first experience with menstruation, I was about 13, I think. No, I lie. I was 11 when I first got my period, which is quite young. It's very young. I knew the anatomy behind it and the biology behind it through school. That was something we had learned about, but obviously when I learned about it, it was in theory, so I could understand it a little bit better when I did get my period. And when I got my period, it wasn't something that was at home because of my background. Our background is that I come from a very open-minded, very liberal, forward-thinking family. So when I did get my period, it wasn't like, oh, I had to hide from my brother, I had to hide from my uncles, and it wasn't something that we just hadn't openly discussed as a family. But we would go, my brother and I, when we were much younger, we would go stay at my grandparents' house. So this was my father's parents every second weekend. And I remember the first time I got my period and I went to my granny's house and stuff, she's like, no, you can't sleep in the bed with me. I was so confused. I was like, what do you mean I can't sleep in the bed with you? So they literally isolated me to a room that nobody slept in. So basically, every time I was on my period, I would be shunned to sleep in that room. There were things like I wasn't allowed to enter the kitchen while she was preparing lunch because that was considered unclean. So I had to have breakfast before she started prepping lunch, or I wouldn't be able to have breakfast at all. There were certain dishes and paraphernalia that I wasn't allowed to touch, like the lamp. I wasn't allowed to go into the temple room. I wasn't allowed to touch my granny. And it was literally what we referred to as being sick. And I remember I was so young and impressionable that I kept wondering, like, what was so sick about me? Like, what have I done that I'm so sick? But yeah, that was a very confusing time, because on one aspect, it's very forward-thinking, accepting, understanding, and open, and then on the other hand, it's very regressive thinking in a way, but also very unexplained as to what was wrong and why it was wrong. And I think it's just sort of through experience that I've maybe gotten to understand a little bit better, and I'm still understanding because some of it I don't get, but I'm still understanding, and yeah, I think formulating my own opinion of what menstruation means and how it actually defines me, if at all.
Thank you so much, Kalpa-latika, for sharing your story so openly. What stood out for me was the experience of menstruation being unclean or dirty. And I think that's something we also need to discuss as we go along. And let's hear Gaurangi's story. Gaurangi is my very good friend for over 2 decades, might actually be 3 decades. she is a well-informed Vaishnavi. That's actually what I would say. She makes a point of learning, understanding, unpacking. So we're so privileged to have you here, Gaurangi, and to have you weigh in on this topic. And we'd like to start with your personal story about menstruation and your experience of it.
Thank you, Rasa-sthali. Yeah, sure. Those are very kind words. But yes, I do have a love of knowing. And I always feel that knowing facts should guide the actions and decisions and the choices we make. When I was young, my mom was a teacher. And as such, you asked any question, and except if you're questioning the Holy Trinity, that wasn't allowed. I grew up Christian, Catholic, and there was such an openness in my entire culture. Culture is very important. Around menstruation, there was a discussion. When I had my first, from when we were about 11, I had a slightly older sister. And from when we were about 11, my mom would start talking to us. And each year, the conversation got a little more detailed and progressive. So I grew up fully understanding what menstruation was, you know, what the body was doing at the time. And, you know, traditionally, a lot of people, there's the blood supposed to be inside the body. And if it's coming outside of the body, then you are sick. Then there's something wrong. And if you don't know a lot about biology, then that happens. But I was very fortunate. And so we grew up in a culture of how to take care of yourself and your body during your menstrual cycle. You know, it wasn't even a discussion. You know, we had, she would talk about it and she would insist on certain things, and we were fine with it. Then I did explore a number of religions, and in each of these philosophical things, I encountered different ideas and traditions and social constructs around things. But with ISKCON, I really joined the society. I practiced it and prayed in that religion, not as an outsider. I really imbibed. And in this, I discovered a whole world of superstition. And it was amazing to me that would be considered unclean. And when I asked about it, there were all these vague and varied answers. But each of them carried the same message. Yes, you're unclean, you are not worthy, you are contaminated and therefore contaminating, you are somehow going to disturb the people around you, and you need to hide yourself because you're just not fit for company. And you definitely need to stay away from anything sacred, which was completely against everything that I had learned. It was the complete opposite. And I had never, the one thing that attracted me was the idea of equality. The sense of souls have the same weight in worth and value. And I liked that. I liked that very much because I lived in a world, obviously, where this was not practiced. But within ISKCON, where it was preached almost daily, you are not this body, you are spirit, soul, etc. I've never been more aware of my body. I became so aware that I was a woman, that I was female, that this is different and somehow bad, and especially at that time of the month. So it was just bizarre. It was completely bizarre to me. And in my encounter, in trying to understand, because I really believed that I just didn't know enough about the scriptural injunctions that were persuading us to act out these social constructs, what the tradition was about, because it always starts with a good idea. So I was at pains to find out, and I kept asking questions, and everybody thought it was just completely uncouth and rude and so uncivilized. And but the thing that arose out from that was that this is the first time I started to really question that ISKCON scripture has the answer to everything. Like, I would follow quite faithfully, like I was really serious. And this is the first time I stepped away, and I was like, when I asked around the whole hygiene issue. Why were women tucking their underwear in dark spaces and not hanging it in the sunshine required to kill off any pathogens, you know? Our genitals are kept in moist, dark, covered places with very little air, and that's a breeding ground for, of course, pathogens. So we needed sunshine, at least in our underwear and any contact that your private parts would have with it. And so that confused me. And when I asked, when she said, oh, you really shouldn't wear tampons. I was a married woman with a child at this point. And she said, you really shouldn't wear tampons. And I was like, why? It has less contact with the atmosphere. There's no oxygen. There's no oxidation of the blood. There's no smell. This is, you know, very clean and hygienic. Why? It's demoniac. And I was like, in what way is it demoniac? You know, basically, the explanation was something like, you're basically sexualizing a tampon. When you're in pain, you are bloated and uncomfortable, you are experiencing a yuckiness in your body. And this is when you feel sexy and want to sexually stimulate yourself. What the hell? I was like so confused. And at that point, I started to doubt that medical advice coming from devotees, I could not find anywhere in the scriptures. And so I started to make a clear distinction between what is considered a senior Mataji and her advice compared to what is actually contained in scripture and what we're supposed to actually do. And I started to really make a division between tradition, social construct, and scripture. Like what is being said. So somebody was giving me their purport, which was not substantiated by anything I could find. And so that's when I really started to think for myself. There are certain topics that are not being discussed and are not injunctions for women. This is from a tradition. This is from a lifestyle that was formulated long, long before we were really as savvy as we are about our bodies now. So that for me, it was a waking up of, there's some things in modern society that actually make more sense, are more hygienic, and not crazy. It's like crazy tradition that we just carry on unquestioningly because we want to be good devotees. That's my story.
So thank you, Gaurangi. You've touched on, and Mathura has also touched on it actually, the ISKCON culture and, or I could say, cult surrounding menstruation. Look, I know Srila Prabhupada used cult in the original meaning of the word, which was quite positive, but I think when we talk about menstruation cult practices within ISKCON, we're saying it in the modern understanding of cult, which is not, it does not have a solid basis. And we're going to talk about that because that's a really big topic. And before we get there, I'd just like to hear Girisha's story and her experience, because for those of you that don't know, Girisha is born and raised as a Vaishnavi. So it'll be interesting what her experience is.
Thanks, Rasa-sthali. Well, the first thing I want to say is like all the stories put together that I just heard, it seems like there's a point there of like a lack of awareness and a lack of proper education that has been given. And it's something that I noticed from a very young age, is that it was never, ever, ever, ever spoken about in the temple. It was never spoken about in any class, in any lecture. They could speak about sex desire, they could speak about illicit sex, that was fine. But when it came to talking seriously about menstruation, that never happened. And I, like many other people, and a lot like Kalpa-latika, obviously, yes, I learned it in biology, but it was made fun of. Because when you see images of a female body or a male body, it's funny to young boys and girls. It's, you know, and it's just, obviously it's immaturity, but we weren't made to understand what this is really about, the importance of it. And for my experience personally as a kid, you know, growing up, going to a local school, and which had majority like Indian people who had Indian cultural backgrounds, it was still not really talked about by any teachers. It was just more in the sense of, okay, this is what biologically it means. Yes, menstruating means that your body is ready for pregnancy. And it doesn't occur to a young child what that means. So there's a huge gap in education, and the only times we hear about it is thankfully through marketing strategies, through certain menstrual companies who, have manufactured menstrual products. We were called aside, but this is what amazed me, or I wouldn't say amazed me, but confused me at the same time, was that we were called separate from the boys. It was like, okay, girls, you have to leave and go to this room and then have this conversation with this person who obviously spoke about, how to put on a sanitary pad, and okay, this is what's going to happen, blood's going to come out, blah blah blah. But again, when you're like 8 years old, 7 years old, you don't pay much attention to the fact that this is going to happen to you. And so when I really found out about it, it was just also like Mathura Mandala's story of like, friends whispering to each other, the secretiveness of it. Like, oh, I inquired, why is this girl, why hasn't she been to school in so long? Don't you know she's got a period? It's like, period? Okay, what's that? And then like it came from my female friends, like, no, this is something, you shouldn't tell anybody about, especially you shouldn't tell boys about. But like, you bleed for so many days, and you have to stay away. No one must see you for the first 7 days of your, when you get it, and you have to have this whole like concoction. But it's not anything medical or realistic. It's coming from this sort of Indian traditional, like hyper traditional, like belief system. And then and then when I got it myself, that I was 12, and it was celebrated. It was like, whoa, celebrations, you're finally a woman, you're a young woman now. And but okay, what does that really mean? And now I'm not a girl, I'm a woman. So this is where the whole identity now changes. Okay, you were a girl, now you're a woman. But the meaning of it was not explained to me, but I was just celebrated. It was like I was having this whole Nelangu or Haldi kind of puja done to me, people giving me gold and like, oh, celebrating it. And then immediately afterwards, right? Immediately after that, no one talks about it. My uncles and everything came for the celebration, and then after that, it's like it never happened. We don't talk about it. It's like, so that really confused me, because I thought it was something to be celebrated. And then as I got older, the experience changed, because now it was something that I had to be ashamed of, something that I had to hide. Like when you have to go out of class and have to, you need a change you need to change. Okay, I'm just going to be a little bit raw here. Yeah, you have to change your pad and all those things. And, it's like, but you have to hide it in like under your clothes, and take your entire bag with all your books with you, just because you have to, change. And then it was like you always had to hide it. And then another experience was this this girl in my class who like messed her white dress, because we used to wear white dresses. and there's a whole thing about like, menstruation and the white dress kind of concept, because you should never wear white when you're in your on your period as well. But it's like a whole thing. And anyway, this girl in primary school, I think she didn't know what was happening to her, and she messed herself, and the stain of the red dripping from her. I was concerned, and I told her about it. But the moment she learned about it, she felt so fearful that she ran out of the classroom with herself, like just kind of messed, and just everyone just laughed at her. And she just hid in the toilet for just like hours, and I tried to find her, like, okay, shouldn't the school have some sort of like relief for this? Like, shouldn't they have sanitary pads available or something like that? And there was nothing of that sort. And she had to leave and go home, and she didn't come back for many days because of the embarrassment. And then at the temple, like if I'm bringing ISKCON into this, and my experience at the temple was like two things. It comes back to the whole like secrecy of it, because I met a non-devotee who we were in high school together, and she came to the temple and wanted to experience what the temple was about. It was Srila Prabhupada's appearance day. It was the day after Janmashtami. Celebrations were going on, and her whole family came, but she stood outside the temple in the sun, just alone. And I recognized her, and I saw her, and I went up. She's like, well, what are you doing? Why are you standing here alone? Come in, come in, experience this joy and festivities. And she said, I can't. I have my period. It's like, wait, who told you can't come inside the temple because you have your period? I have my period. I'm going inside. Come with me. Like, and this is what. Then it started to occur to me, the sexualization, the socialized view of menstruation, the negative connotations around it. And I remember that you just would ask your friends, like, am I missed? Like in the temple when you wake up, like, is my sari missed? And it was always whispers. No one ever felt proud enough to say, I got my period. And then that's where the whole like off the altar and Auntie Susie and just all these things came about, and it was just like never the discomfort of it. And then when I started realizing these things and learning more and more about it in my university years, to the point that people would be so afraid to even speak to their parents about it, that an article that came out this year, in fact, spoke to this period poverty situation, and I hope Gaurangi touches more on this whole period poverty situation. But period poverty is both like lack of information and the lack of period products or availability or access to sanitary products. And because of that, these young Black girls in rural areas and stuff, they would use chicken feathers to stop their like getting missed. They would use mattress fibers. They would in India they use dirty rags, and so this is my whole like experience of it, is at some point some girls are using mud, and how unhealthy, and how it made me so uncomfortable to think that just by the lack of information and the lack of sanitary provision, which is actually part of a governmental, sustainability development program. It's actually, stipulated there, but like at least, I don't know, maybe like 17 to probably more than that, 50%, I would say, of people still don't understand this concept properly, still don't understand what they can do. So yeah, I'm gonna stop there because I'm going a little bit too much, but yeah, that's my experience.
So thank you so much, Girisha. We definitely got a lot to unpack there. I see Gaurangi's hand raised. Before we go to Gaurangi, I just wanted to do a quick recap of the kind of things that have come up. And we started off with the idea of uncleanness and contamination around menstruation when you are menstruating. We touched on the shame and the fear. Giri, you spoke about that quite a lot. And an interesting thing you concluded with is a lack of support, which to me is a lack of a basic human right, actually, because we're not providing for more than half the population here. So that's there. Then also the sexualization, which Gaurangi brought up with the tampons, the sexualization around menstruation, which is really such a strange thing. Gaurangi, thank you so much for your patience. Please share.
Yeah, so there's three things I basically want to point out. One of them is around separating the boy child and the girl child at a really young age, and then making it impossible for them. They are introduced to the topic in their immaturity. And you can understand that immature children, when society has inserted this taboo into their interactions and then reinforces it, when the girl got up, the little girl that Girisha was speaking about, and in shame and embarrassment rushes out with her white dress bloodied, or everybody laughs because the boys have no idea what's going on, and they know that this is taboo and they're not supposed to be going to this topic, and therefore they don't know how to deal with it. And then we say that boys are nasty. They're not educated to cope with this. The girls are not educated, even though it is happening to us. So many women don't even know that there are 3 openings to your body. One to the urethra, which is an opening for you to pee through from your bladder. The other is the vaginal opening, which is an opening to your womb. And then the anus, which is an opening to your alimentary canal. And a lot of women don't know this because the whole basis of medicine is around the male body. And they have one opening for both semen and urine. And so they don't unpack this. You have to learn about it either in biology or study it on your own. And a lot of people didn't do biology to the point where they find out about their bodies. So lots of superstition gets into there. The second thing that I find exceptionally disheartening and undermining of a woman's sense of wealth and worth is the disassociation from being a sexy, beautiful, sexually attractive being, okay, and then being a sexual creature. The maiden is supposed to be innocent and unknowing. The mother is supposed to be wise and discreet. At no point is a woman considered, if she is a sexual creature, then she's uncool, she's totally unfit. Okay, so you go from the maiden to the mother and nothing in between. There's no learning going in between. And yet you have the sutras, and one of them is the Karma Sutra, which teaches you about sexuality and about the body. But this is all like some sort of dirty hidden book because everybody is focusing on positions. When that's it's supposed to inform about so many things. Menstruation is kind of one of them. But in there, men are telling, oh no, women don't orgasm and women don't this. You have so a sexual woman is, and a mother, it can't be the same thing. So there's a divorcing from a sexual being and the ability to produce children. Once you are pregnant, somehow it is a miracle and immaculate conception because now the mother still remains the virginal mother. All right. And so there's like this silence around sexuality and the body and the health of it, and the focus on your function. And it reduces a woman from all that she is into a function bearing children. She's a baby factory. And her worth, you will find that a woman's worth is reduced in places where there's a very high expectation of female virginity, innocence, and ignorance, and the availability of women. The men become more aggressive, and there is a wider, more ingrained aggression around fighting for females, so that females become commodities. And you know, when you're reduced to nothing but a body and a machine to make babies, or a servant, you don't have a sense of self. So we talk about the psychological and the psychosomatic impact of being ashamed of your body and being dirty every month, etc., etc. And the last thing I really want to talk about is pink tax. Everything that is pink or catering for women, catering for females or girls is like 2 to 5 times more expensive than the same thing, the same cotton t-shirt. If it is in blue, it'll cost a certain amount. The minute it's pink with My Little Pony or whatever, suddenly it's like 5 times more expensive. When it comes to female hygiene products, the same is true. So when you're talking about what tradition does and how it stops you from asking questions, otherwise you're an unworthy, unfit, and not a good person, not a good devotee, not a good wife, you are indecent to discuss those topics that affect you and your future. Those are the things that silence you. And this is not about making people uncomfortable, unless it leads to a healthier outcome. So yeah, let me stop there because I can go on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gaurangi, for that overview. And I think it's important that we keep that in front of us as we go forward. Mathura, I see your hand raised.
I just want to get, well, everyone's perspective on this. Kalpa-latika has brought it up, Gaurangi, and yourself, Girisha. The whole thing about being unclean and uncleanliness. So there's a lovely manual doing the rounds called the Vaishnav Manual, and in there they have one whole page dedicated to menstruation and how we are so unclean when we are menstruating. So let's just unpack this, and then I'd like to have positive spins on menstruation. But my question is that we know in spiritual tradition that a dog and a cat is considered unclean if they come into the house, or if they see the bhoga that you've prepared, you cannot offer it if they touch you if you're going to serve the deity. And when I read this manual, the whole aspect of uncleanliness is if you touch somebody at the temple who's going to worship, that person's now dirty. And it's almost like what Kalpa was saying, now you've got to separate yourself so you don't touch anyone, you don't contaminate anyone. So are we being likened to animals? Anyone jump in?
So Mathura, just before we go, I open the floor, I want to ask you, in that manual, do they offer any shastric references? Is there some sort of substantiation in the recommended behaviors?
No. When I look at it, it's purely based on maybe Hindu culture or things that have been practiced in a certain tradition.
Okay.
So nothing shastric I could come across.
Can I see your hand, Girisha, but I really just want to make a point because I am going to forget it. You know, the idea that we are unclean, we are made up of unclean things, you know, blood, pus, and phlegm. So it's not like your body is in any way cleaner because you're male. And of course, oxygenation of blood does create pathogens. But if you're using like a tampon or you just bathed, etc., you are sufficiently clean. This is not to challenge the tradition of deity worship. Every single religious tradition is basically, they incorporate certain rules and regulations to assist us in remembering. It's not like we have to bow down for God to be pleased with us or whatever. But this is all these practices that the extra effort that we make to do certain things was originally designed for us to remember Krishna. to remember being in the presence of divinity. And so I don't really have any objections to traditional ways wherever you are on the globe and how you want to express and remember the Lord or whatever, and remember Radharani. That's not what I'm objecting to. It's the artificial add-ons that have nothing to do with what was first written or the first tradition. So the traditions of worshipping deities, for example, depending on your traditional background, this may seem completely foreign, but I was Catholic, so, statues and imagery of mother and child and the love of a mother for a child and all that kind of thing. I didn't think it was overly strange, but there are traditions where it is. So the idea of what is done within that tradition to glorify or, worship and be conscious of divinity. I mean, why do we say the Lord's name over and over? The chanting is all about trying to remember, right? The more you remember, then the more conscious you are of divinity. And that's where it's supposed to be at, right? But the constraints that were placed on us by men who knew nothing about what they're talking about is what we are really objecting to. So it's not like I'd say, let's start a protest that all women that are so-called not clean can now go around touching lamps and climbing onto altars to worship deities. That's not where this is at. This is about creating a reasonable, stable way of looking at things. Like dogs, they basically lick their genitals and they eat from your plate. I think there's something wrong with that. And to make an analogy between a human being and an animal, the same way they make analogies between how animals should be disciplined, how children should be disciplined, and how women should be disciplined. Because the understanding is you're less intelligent, you have an inferior body, and you are clearly, your soul is not the same value as a man. So just to echo what Mathura said, and I think those are the things that we are kind of raising questions around that as a society we may need to look at, or at least in our own personal practice, need to give some serious consideration to.
Yes, thank you, Gaurangi. And I think the point around that is that as women, we need to get a clear picture first and foremost. And that's why we're having this discussion, and that's why everybody's weighing in here, so that we get a better understanding, we get a clearer picture. And it's clear to us that we're not the same as dogs. When Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, low birth, Vaishyas, Sudras, and women, and the question was asked, why is this? The reasoning is because they are subject to exploitation. And all of us, the women here, we know that being a woman, you are subject to exploitation. In the workplace, when you're walking home, in every scenario. And that's what the meaning is. It's not about low birth, that you are low. It's because people can take advantage of you. But we're not going to
get about power. You're basically saying those without power are subject to exploitation. So are men that are without power. So, and that's a slave. The whole idea is that you are without power, and the society we are born into and are subject to have created spaces where we are without power over our own bodies. The Muslim taking, the women used to go out at night to use the toilet, and if you were poor, they had a certain dress, and if you were wealthy, you had a certain dress. And Muhammad's solution was women should not be recognizable, because women with power, who came from powerful clans, if somebody hurt them or molested them or injured them in any way, they would be subject to retribution. And so he said every woman in the night going out to use the toilet should look the same. And that's where the burqa comes from. That's where hijab stems from. And now you have to wear it wherever you go. So there's the distorting of what is said to protect those without power and what is done to us, keeping us powerless. Yeah. And when I came into ISKCON in that context, my power and sense of self was taken away from me. And that's what I was basically objecting to.
Absolutely. And the thing is that, as you said, Gaurangi, it's that taking away of power. And that is the misinterpretation and a misuse of power when it comes how men abuse their power. But look, this is veering off a little bit, and I just want to bring it back, and I want to bring it back to Girisha, who has been very patiently having her hand raised for a while. Giri, thank you so much. Let's hear from you.
Okay, I hope I remember everything that I wanted to say in regards to Mathura's question. But I was actually going to bring up the same point of power. And I was going to bring up the point of all of this understanding, the certain interpretations of the Shastra came from a patriarchal viewpoint. And as there was an article that Gaurangi had sent me a while back when I first started the conversation with her, which was such an important article for me to understand that it's not only now that we're going through this, it's not only, like then that we're going through this, it's historically women have been treated that way. And the whole idea of rentent, which I also want to ask you about, Rasa-sthali, but I'll come to that just now. But there's this whole concept of, the red tent, and where it came from was basically the fear that men had for a woman's power and ability. So a woman has the ability to bleed for 7 days and still remain alive and unaffected and active during their time. And men found this fearful. Wow, women can have so much of power. And the second thing was, in that article, was that, and in many articles that I've seen, is the reaction to birth, to carrying a baby and birth, because they related it to animalistic qualities, which comes to the point of, okay, cat and dog and the differentiation. And they found that these abilities of giving birth and stuff so inhumane that they wanted to contain it because they were afraid of it, because they can't do it and they don't understand it. And so they developed this whole idea around, okay, you know what, let's put the woman in a separate place while they having this thing. Let's put them away from us because they're afraid of it. And so this is where the whole you see how patriarchy started even with the Native Americans in that era. And yeah, I know Kalpa-latika has something to say, and afterwards I have a kind of question for you, Rasa-sthali, about the whole red tent idea. And then the second thing that I wanted to bring up was Mother Ramburu. If anyone doesn't know Ramburu Prabhu, she is an amazing individual. She has started, kind of training sessions and support systems for mental health called the Karuna Care Program. And I had a conversation with her initially about, menstruation, because I've always kind of had a lack of understanding, had a lot of confusion around it. I still kind of, and I hope that through this conversation we can dispel some of those myths that I've heard. But her response to me was quite amazing, and her response to me was, the reason for all this, ideas around menstruation is that there is an Indian traditional version of Vaishnavism, that it comes from that really deep rooted culture of India and South India, where women have to live outside when they have their periods. And but then again, it's the misinterpretation sometimes of what the Shastra actually says, and it's just, are these women even really reading it for the full understanding? It's just people telling them this is what you need to do. you have to live outside, you have to use rags, and you can't dry those rags in the sunshine, you can't show anybody, you can't you have to be completely hidden, you can't touch anyone, you can't even lie next to your husband if you know, have your period. And Jewish culture even has the same thing. You know, they have these like ridiculous like 7-hour, whatever, 12-hour bathing kind of ceremonies for women with menstruation. They, you know, in reading into, you know, women's identity and religion, there were some articles that were discovered about how Jewish people, you know, you can't, if you're sitting at a table and eating food, you have to have something placed like in between you, because no one must see you when you're menstruating. No one must see the woman when you're menstruating. So a lot of religious misinterpretations and a lot of patriarchy involved in that. Okay, we'll get to the other stuff later. Kalpa can go.
Thank you, Girisha. Just before we go to Kalpa-latika, I just want to ask you, what was the logic behind the Jewish practice of being blocked out?
It was still the sense of cleanliness. You know, you're unclean.
So
you're
also
dirty.
an unclean thing.
Yeah, and that even the sight of the woman on their menstruation is like, you can be contaminated by that, and it can contaminate a man's mind, and all that stuff. And, you know.
Yeah, we powerful people. Okay, so thank you so much, Girisha. Kalpa-latika, thank you so much for your patience. We'd love to hear from you.
It's been a very loaded response. I'm also hoping that I remember everything. But Mother Mathura's question touches on cleanliness. So I think she's hit the nail on the head in saying that we're likening women who are menstruating to be no better than cats and dogs, which I think is also a status thing. I think it's trying to shove us into this little box and define us by it. And I also think, like, with that, you know, using the term something like off the altar, I personally have a gripe with that term, because what that means is that it means, quite literally, it means that you're unfit to serve the Lord. And in my personal opinion, I strongly believe that the only thing that would ever dictate your fitness to serve the Lord is your consciousness. If your consciousness is not directed towards serving the Lord, if it is contaminated by, you know, your own personal sense gratification, your own personal desires, like, you know, if I'm doing it to be able to gain something, that is not necessarily the mood and the mode in which I should be serving. You know, so I think that using the term off the altar is a very powerful, very, very strong and very negative term to be using. And I must point out that a man that has gone to the bathroom is also off the altar. But he will never say that. He will never, you know, if he's asked to go do pujari service, but he's gone to make a wee, he will never say, sorry, I'm off the altar, because automatically it comes with the connotations of being like, oh, I'm on my period, you know, because we've now likened that term with, you know, I'm menstruating. And by default, it's, oh, he's a male who's menstruating. But a follow-up question from me would be, what constitutes cleanliness? You know, I don't understand what makes us clean, pure, like post-menstruating. I understand that it's a 3-day, you got to wash your hair, you got to change your bed sheets. But if that's something I do on the norm, I mean, I'm washing my hair 2 or 3 times a week. If I'm not washing it, if I'm only washing it 3 times a week of 7 days, am I unclean on those other 4 days? You know, bed sheets I'm changing once a week. So are my bed sheets dirty for 6 out of 7 days? I'm not understanding that. And I also want, if anybody, I don't know if Denise would be able to answer this question, Gaurangi, sorry, is where does the 3-day, like what defines that it must be 3 days?
Thank you, Kalpa. Thank you, Kalpa-latika, for your comments and your questions. Gaurangi, I'm going to come to you in a moment. I just want to touch on something that Girisha had raised, and maybe you will give us better insight on it. She spoke about Indian tradition and how we've imported elements of that Indian tradition into our ISKCON Vaishnava culture. And I'm reminded again by what Srila Prabhupada had done for us and the kind of Vaishnava culture that he had introduced into ISKCON that really didn't exist before. People can say whatever they want to, but he introduced a Vaishnava culture that did not exist before him. And that is the opportunities that he gave women in terms of worshiping the deities and leading kirtan, and just basically that equal opportunity to serve. And whenever I think of my culture, my spiritual culture, I think of what Srila Prabhupada has brought to us. Not, where, 500 years ago or 200 years ago, when women were not initiated and they were not worshipping the deities. So we live in a very different paradigm, and I think people forget that. They forget what Srila Prabhupada has given to us. So thank you. We'll go on to Gaurangi.
Well, I would like to also point out that we've also forgotten what was taken away from us. And now we're supposed to be super grateful for the scraps that we do get now. And so my whole thing is, Prabhupada is unparalleled in terms of his forward thinking. And as far from where he was coming from, he was so exceptionally liberal that a large percentage of his God family turned away from him. But for 33 million years of human existence in all our pre-cranium and Cambrian existence in history, women dominated because we were the magic keepers. We were the bringers of life. When men stood up, when a woman stood, when a woman left the room, they stood up. There was a lot of respect. So in the past, it was a matriarchal societies where women had many husbands because a woman couldn't fall pregnant, and when they wanted to keep the numbers small, there was one woman, okay, to a number of men, so that families were contained in that way. So if you go back in history, if you really want to talk about what actually went on in the past, women were celebrated, they were honored for all that they brought. In Zulu culture, there isn't a word in the Zulu language for menopause. Because when a woman hit menopause, she became a sage, she became a crone. The crone is honored as a wise person. Mathura and I were chatting about ancient wisdom regarding cultures, and she was bringing up Egyptian ancient, tradition, etc. That was the cult of Isis. The mother was the god. The wisdom of the mother just remained. There was an honoring. But what has happened in that patriarchy and instilling where women were supposed to be taken care of when they were supposed to be vulnerable, and the red tent idea, that turned into a punishment. If you tell a guy, "Are you on your period?" it's an insult. It's an insult. When a guy says to a woman, a girl, "Are you on your period?" it means that she's being unreasonable and illogical. So there's all kinds of connotations attached to the word, or being on your period, or being off the altar, or menstruating. Basically, there's a whole lot of myths attached to that. So in terms of a woman, when you are young, the use for you, the function that you serve is to be sexy, a bed partner, and to bear children. In modern Western society, there's a whole culture, a whole industry around looking and being young. Why? Because only if you're young and seemingly childbearing age do you have value. In the past, women had value by virtue of the fact that when they go into menopause, they gain a kind of wisdom. They turn their accommodating of the world to be peace bringers and accommodate everybody and all their stuff to make the family work and keep it together. And they turned that into wisdom. And women were sought out. And they became the village witch. Now, which used to be wise woman, now it means some grumpy old person who eats children or something, or Satan worshiper. So that everything related to women is negative. And your value, the value of you as a person, the minute you lose your sexiness, you lose your value. Everybody's fighting to be younger. We remember earlier we were talking about the idiocy of Botox and liposuction and all that nonsense. Some people die early and they're not given an opportunity to grow old. And we are fighting age because your age is now determining your worth as a woman. Men don't need to have all that kind of thing. They do because they're very vain. But the point is that most of them, an older guy is still considered sexy or viable or a whole person. And the minute you use your value as a sex partner, you become valueless. So the societal contract that says, if you are unclean, you shouldn't worship on the altar. It's about you remembering. It's not about bluffing other people in the audience, watching you turn the lamp 4 times. It's not about, deity worship is about attracting people to a show. Okay, it's about attracting people to the worship. They make it grand and beautiful, so that if you've seen some of the Shilas that are worshipped, they're quite unattractive, right? So Shilagram worship is not as glamorous as Radha Krishna worship. So the whole idea of deity worship in this age of Kali Yuga is just to attract people to become higher thinking human beings. So simple living, etc. But our focus is still on, is she a viable sex mate? And when you become, then you're allowed to go on the altar because you're old and your feminine juju, this contaminating part of you. When you're an old crone and you're on the altar, then you're an acceptable human being. Then you're allowed to kind of do these things because you've lost your womanhood, basically. It's like, wow, okay. People who have mastectomy, where they have their breast removed, even when they're 70 years old, it's just part of their identity. Other people don't see that. No, they want young, firm, and perky. Therefore, they have no value.
Gaurangi,
everything is around pleasing a man. Yes.
Gaurangi, you've just gone off topic.
No, but in terms of the insult of being a woman. And
I know, but that is a conversation for another day.
We had it already, thanks. No, but the point around it really is, it's quite a serious thing when the exploitation of women is right through society and it's accepted by women, reinforced by women. By women.
So Gaurangi, I'm hearing Mathura and I'm hearing you, and I think that that was the point that I brought up earlier, is that our point here is to educate women, and it is true, we do need it. And the thing is that sexuality is tied in with our menstruation. That's just the way things are now, and I think that's why we're having the discussion about one's sexuality. Of course, what's really striking me is there's a societal belief around menstruation and sexuality and women. And we may not be able to influence it on a big scale, but if we can start as individuals to reshape the way we think, then we need to have these difficult conversations and start talking to your friends, start talking to your family, and see where the conversation takes you. Girisha, your hand has been up for a while, so I'll hand it to you.
Okay, to bring it back to menstruation, and to also comment on what Kalpa-latika was saying and Gaurangi. So, okay, Gaurangi mentioned 2 things and that stood out for me, which was the acknowledgement in the term of menopause, which is also related to menstruation. And the other thing was how after menopause, women are seen as witches and things like that. So what I want to say first is yeah, people often look at menopause as also a negative thing that affects women a lot, and that's why there's like no term for it. But I like that Gaurangi mentions how, you know, you are seen as like a wise person after that. You're meant to give this great sense of wisdom. And this was reminding me of a story um, about Pishima. And I know when people hear the story, when they hear the end of the story, they like see it in a negative light. But I actually now, after hearing Gaurangi, I see it as a very positive story. And so the story of Pishima, she's, you know, just a young woman that came into, you know, spiritual life, and was very spiritually inclined and started serving. And, you know, she just kind of somehow got put in a situation where she had to worship these Gornitai deities. So Pishima, being kind of a young devotee, she did everything. She fell in love with these deities. She had many conversations. She lived her life just trying to serve them. And one day, while she was cooking, you know, and you know, she had all the boga, or that's like unoffered, you know, food for those who don't know. Um, and she was preparing this food for Gornitai, and then she got her period, you know, while she was doing this. And immediately she like stopped, and then she went outside, and then she felt so like hurt and upset at, oh, I can't serve, you know, Gornitai now, you know, because I've got my period. And so she stopped, and she didn't offer the boga. And that night Gornitai appeared in her dream, and said to her, you know, Ma, because they called her like their mom, they took her as their mom, and they were saying, we're hungry. You didn't give us any food today. We're hungry. Please offer us food. Please, we hungry. We need to eat. And she says, but I can't. You know, I have my period. And they said, no, we're still hungry. Please, don't worry about all that. Just serve me. Just give me food. You know. And so on their instruction, that she felt that it was an instruction, she offered them prasad. And people see the negativity, because the end of the story, she says that she never got her period again, that Gornitai kind of blessed her to go into like early menopause basically. But what I see from that is they were her babies. She, you know, that they were her children already. She didn't have any desire to have children because she thought of them as her children. And then the second thing was that menopause is not something to be seen as negative. As Gaurangi said, it made her more wise. It made her serve even better. And then the second thing about, you know, the witch and the witches, and how their connection with menstruation was that sometimes they would use their menstrual blood and mix it within their soil for growth, because that menstrual blood is meant to carry a baby. You know, it's meant to sustain a baby and grow a baby. And so they realize that it can help grow plant life. And then a little like years into the future, as we start seeing this negative concept of the witch, these doctors, medical doctors, and I'm highlighting medical doctors, did this test, right? There's a whole article about how they did this test on plants, which they, you know, used a dropper and put menstrual blood on plants, and the plants died, right? So they saw it as, oh yes, menstrual blood is, you know, poisonous, right? But here's the funny thing about it. If you put any blood in a plant, it will die, right? If you put any blood on a leaf, it will die. But they didn't have a control testing for this. They just tested it with menstrual blood and decided that menstrual blood is poisonous. But there's no logic to that. It was just literal, pure patriarchy at its best. You know, this testing that was done with no control. Why don't you test any other blood? Okay, prick your finger and put your blood on it and see if the plant will die. And the difference is that, yes, they used it in the soil to nourish the soil. The witches used this to nourish the soil. They didn't put it on the actual plant itself. So a huge difference. And then the third thing that I want to go to is, just like Kalpa-latika, I've had many questions about these myths that I've heard about, you know, I know I'm bringing up so many things, I apologize. But yeah, Kalpa-latika's thing on like, yeah, okay, 3 days and then we wash our hair. What does this hair have to do with the fact that I'm still bleeding? You know, what does that have to do with anything? And then there's these preposterous, you know, like practices that go on with menstruation that, you know, like people, devotees that have told me that they tie their toes to stop themselves from bleeding, and I have such huge like confusion about all of this. Like, where is this coming from? I've never read it anywhere in scripture. Where is this coming from that you have to do this? So that was the third thing. And then the fourth thing is, Rasa-sthali, I have a question specifically for you, which I wanted to ask you from the beginning. And that's coming back to this red tent idea, because I know personally you've expressed to me a few times that, oh, you loved that idea of like, hey, you know, 7 days break, 3 days break, that's cool for me. So I just want to know, like, yeah, like, what's your opinion on the whole red tent idea as well? That's my question to you. Yeah, that's all for now.
Thank you so much, Girisha. I'm just looking at the time, and we're coming to the end of close to our 90 minutes, so we're going to have to round up and not cover everything that we've brought up here, and hopefully it starts a conversation in your own communities. The one thing that I want to bring up, and I think it's really important, is that Srila Prabhupada did not introduce any special practices when it came to women going off the altar. It was when, if you look at ISKCON history, it was when the devotees went to India and they met devotees there, female devotees there. That was when this idea of, you know, not going into the temple or whatever it was, you know, the uncleanness and stuff was introduced. And the devotees did go to Srila Prabhupada, and Prabhupada said, yes, you can follow. But it was not, you know, the fact that Prabhupada, who is an Indian gentleman, he comes from that kind of background, it was not a priority for him in terms of the mission and the service. And therefore, I just want to bring that back in because of what Srila Prabhupada had done for us. And, you know, that's there. So, Giri, I'm just going to try and very quickly answer your question to me. And, you know, so when the women went to India and they were introduced to this idea, and I'm pretty sure that they thought 7 days was way too much, you know, because we know people who live full time in the temple, 7 days, you just don't have that kind of time. That's, you know, 25% of the month. That's 25% of the year to just, you know, chill. We don't have it. So I think it was a very practical consideration. It's my speculation because I have not ever heard any Shastric definitive idea behind the 3-day thing, except that we were told. So my thing is, I think the 3 days was considered, okay, you know, that's the maximum time we can give somebody. And I loved it. I didn't need to get up in the morning for Mangal Arati. And, you know, I didn't need to go out on book distribution for 8 hours. I didn't have to stand on my feet. The truth is, I did feel more tired when I was menstruating. So I appreciated the extra rest, and I'm not much of a morning person, so I loved it. You know, I know in society, you know, women carry on as it's normal, but, you know, I'm just saying what my experience was in the temple and how much I appreciated it. But was it necessary? No, I don't. You know, well, I was a pretty healthy menstruating person that didn't experience terrible pains and stuff. So it wasn't absolutely necessary for somebody like me. But maybe other people who really struggled, you know, it served them well. Now, with regards to the red tent, I'm going to just answer that very quickly. So I've heard a different version of that story from the one, from the article that Gaurangi had shared with us. And the version that I've heard, and you know, how the stories come and how they disseminate, and you know, whether the version I've heard is romanticized is questionable. So I would have to do more research, but just to quickly touch on it. And the thing is that women were given the space. Firstly, their children were taken care of by other women in the community, and they were allowed to go into the red tent and bleed into the earth to give back to the earth, which is something you touched on. And they were allowed to go through, it was considered that during menstruation, a woman was more in tune astrologically, and you know, the term is moon blood. You know, people, that's the term, moon blood, when you get your moon blood. So there is a planetary influence and so many things happening. And it was considered a rest phase and a awakening phase. That was what I had come across. But to say that, you know, it's one or the other, I wouldn't be able to, but that was what I heard. And maybe, you know, offline, we can do a bit of research together, Girisha, and look at that. So Giri, you want to have a comment about me loving the Off the Altar?
Yeah,
can I please have my say? I really do have two points I want to make. I know I talk a lot, but
also, can I ask, can we go like a half an hour more, or do we have to stop now?
We're in charge. Like,
Okay, I think it's very.
There's a lot. There's a little bit more for us to cover.
We're in charge. Yeah, I think. Yeah, I'm with Girisha. We're having the conversation, and if people find it extraneous, they don't have to continue listening, you know. But it's good to have the information out there. So just regarding the red tent, in many cultures around the world, they've actually instituted that thing. So the idea of the red tent, lunar and moon blood, comes from the idea that a woman's cycle carries for 28 days before the next one. So the 28-day moon cycle was linked to the moon because of that timing. The prohibition again for 3 days being this, that, and the other, and what you had to or had not to do, came straight out of the ignorance of men. I read this one Sanskrit scholar, her name is Wendy Doninger. She's brilliant. And she did a whole look into menstruation and women's sexuality, etc., in ancient India, based on the Sanskrit scriptures. And in that time, it started off as allowing a woman to experience her wisdom and intuition, and it had ended up being an ostracization. But in that being away from the family and isolated, they were given very little food, very little water, almost no sanitation. They were exposed to the elements, lots of heat and lots of cold, depending on the season. So what may have started out as a good thing with most things in religion and traditions, it deteriorated into some sort of, you know, punish you for being female. The second one was the idea of Prabhupada not having any prohibition against women worshipping during that time before it was brought up by the Indian. First of all, you have to have agreements within social contract. So in order for us to get along, we have to agree on certain things. And when you don't keep your word, you're considered dishonest and unworthy. So he wanted to satisfy a lot of the people as possible without unduly creating havoc. That's the one idea. And the other is that his own mother in his own home, and his father worshipping and his mother worshipping and cleaning, etc. There was no, women in their own homes worship their deities, their family deities, without pause. They don't stop cooking and cleaning, etc. That just became a modern fashion to further prohibit us. And the final thing was the injunction. Once you start worshipping, if you have kept your word in terms of the social contract, everybody knows that before you go on the altar, you need to be clean. And when you got on the altar, you were clean. I had a friend who was on the altar in the middle of worship and she needed to wee. And her body just took over and she peed herself on the altar. And it struck her that she's unclean and she's not allowed to, but she peed on the altar. So what to do? And the injunction from scripture is not even war is to interrupt your worship. War is spilling blood. So there's that. And one last comment is roses love blood. And actually the potassium in blood is super fabulous for the health of roses. And if you have to, when it's mixed into the soil and it breaks down into its separate components, it's exceptionally nourishing. So we now know that why graveyards are so green. It's because plants are carnivorous and they don't really make their food from the sun. I'm kidding. Of course they do. But the nutrients that they're drawing from the earth, when they're broken down into their component parts, they perfectly serve the planet. This is why when we break down, when we die, we're supposed to give back to the earth, like we embalm, and so it's not longer available. And that's all I have to say on those topics that you raised. Moving on, shall we discuss hygiene, the human body? Yes, no?
So good. Before we go into that, Giri, do you want to have anything else to say?
Yeah, so I had just a little bit to say about the whole 3-day enjoying that period of time of rest. And it was something that very recently I was having a conversation with my aunt, and she spoke about reading an article on chakras. And I mean, this is also part of Vedic culture, looking at chakras. And she says the reasoning, well, this is her understanding of this article that she read, is that we have chakras that are going right up through our body, and the yogic process is that eventually you reach each chakra till you come to a higher consciousness. That's the yogic process, is you go higher up in the yoga ladder, and chakras are involved in that. And there was an interesting idea about why women need rest during that time, is because of the gravitational control of the material planet, is that the menstrual blood does not go up, that it flows downward. And because it's flowing downward from your chakras, now your chakras are not, it's not able to go up because this menstruation is bringing it down. And this is why everything emotionally, bodily, physically, we do have some sort of depletion, because your body is getting yourself ready for pregnancy, but it's moving downward. It's moving your chakras downward, and that energy is going down. And that is why you need downtime. That's why you need that rest time, is because you have to give yourself that rest enough so that your chakras can eventually, after the period stops, then it starts to move up again. So I thought that was very interesting, and I wanted to specifically comment on that yes, it is enjoyable, and that's probably the reason why, is because your energy levels are so drained and down at that time that you need that rest period. So yeah, it can be seen as a positive thing as well, if yeah, that was my comment.
Modern medicine calls that hormonal action and the hormonal impact on the body during menstruation. But yeah, you study the esoteric view of the body with meridians and energy meridians and stuff, I suppose. There's those esoteric explanations.
So, Gaurangi, before you go into the physical health aspect of menstruation, I just wanted to share a little story. Well, a video that I watched actually 2 days ago. It was a short video, and it was of this the school-going girl walking home from school with her school bag, and she's wearing a white Punjabi, and she's got a huge menstrual stain on her back, and she's totally unaware, and she's walking home. And there are women walking around her, and they're looking at her and walking past her and not helping her. This was in South India, and the reason I say South India, I could identify it by the dressing. And then came along an old man who was wearing his lungi and his t-shirt, and he had a chadar over his shoulders, a check chadar. He sees her and he walks up to her, taking off his chadar, and he says to her, gestures to her to put it on around her. And he walks off in the opposite direction. But he was the person that helped her. And you get good men like that.
Yes.
And
society is a spiral where we create bad men, and then bad men create dominated, subjugated women who are angry and bitter and fighting, and then we create patriarch. So it's a cycle, and if we don't stand together, it's not a fight. Men who are that way need education as well. And as you said earlier, the nurse calls you and all the girls into a separate room, so the boys don't have compassion, they're not taught to. And be a girl is considered an insult.
Yeah, absolutely. And then also just another piece of interesting information. We were talking about terminology, the crone and menopause, and I wanted to talk about this word spinster. And originally, spinster was a word for an unmarried woman who was financially independent. That means she did not need a man. And it was considered a good thing yet again. But, yet again, anything good needs to be stripped away because women are subject to exploitation, as are Shudras and Vaishyas. Mathura, I see your hand. Shudras and Vaishyas. Men.
I was just going to say, we're speaking, so it's no longer a whisper. Menstruation is no longer a whisper. We're putting it out there. And, women who are going to watch us, and even men, speak about it. There's nothing to be ashamed about. Because from this wondrous act of menstruation, babies are born. My son, who I've had, with all my difficulties, I'm very open to him about menstruation. He has no shame in walking into a store and buying tampons or sanitary pads. To him, it's a fact of life. This is what happens. So we need to remove the shame ourselves.
Yes.
And it starts with us.
If we treat ourselves as going through a shameful period during your period, then we signal to others around us that they should be ashamed for us. They should be embarrassed for us. If you'll notice that if you'll ever had sex education at school, the sex education teacher was always to the point. Never entertained. She didn't have an issue with people laughing. If somebody giggled because there was a picture of, female genitalia or male genitalia on the board that she needed to explain, she'd giggle and she said, "You're done now?" and carry on. And the attitude of those leading those kind of discussions is so important to inform others how to respond. I think that becomes very important, that we ourselves, how we treat ourselves is what we transmit to others, creating how do they come back to us.
And I wanted to digress a little bit, and this is, well, maybe Girisha or you, because both of you mentioned this, you can shed some light on it. When did the practice stop of using menstrual blood for planting? Because I've just got into planting recently.
I read your comment.
This is a fact I never knew.
I know, my roses are not growing now, so I'm very excited, Gaurangi. I think I need to try this.
Actually, in England and Europe, quite late into the 18th century and the 19th century, they were still doing it in lots of the rural communities. And what really stopped it was the Victorian Elizabethan age, where they became sophisticated. So sophisticated with the more and more rules they apply on each other. So especially during the reign of Queen Victoria, where that all became, it was considered pagan now. And if you were caught doing that, you were somehow consorting with the devil or something. And that's where things started to really take a buckle under. And then it spread into the countryside where this used to be a great idea. I mean, if you take, for example, the usefulness of cow manure, the dung of cows is so super nutritious and healthy, and it is completely pathogen free. It has absolutely, it cannot be contaminated with bacteria and viruses, right? It's as good as jick. And now for people to touch it and say they got, ew, oh goodness. Meanwhile, not understanding the nature of the thing. Of course, you're not going to equate the purity of cow dung to our menstrual blood, because we do have pathogens in it, and we do, in oxidation, it does create all kinds of things. It does allow for bacterial life to flourish. So on that level, it is dirty. The same way when you go to the loo, you bathe properly. But it stopped during that period when sexuality was deeply suppressed, deeply repressed. And this is where it became super shameful for anybody to have any relationship that wasn't chaperoned. Whether you did anything wrong was not the issue. The idea of breaking propriety was, and it was always the woman's fault, because the guy kind of got off scot-free and the woman bared the shame of it. So she would be ruined if her reputation was tainted with the idea that she'd been alone in a room with a man.
Sorry, but going back to, we were speaking about the 3 day, should we get 3 days off or 7 days off? And one thing just occurred to me, I like 7 too. One thing occurred to me, in rural settings, obviously they probably keep women in isolation in a red tent, because again, going back to having a period, but having a period and wandering out if you were living in a jungle somewhere, and that oxidization of the blood, that smell would attract animals, wouldn't it?
It depends on, okay, so Aboriginal cultures that are in really warm environments have very different practices. In India, that's also warm, but it has a lot of like felts and open fields where they're working on rice paddies and harvesting wheat, where a lot of the women are doing the gardening. Well, men now too, but they have, like the female dress of the woman in India, like they wear a sari, and they would wear 2 saris on the days of their menstrual period. And the first one, they'd wrap like a dhoti, and the second one would go over that skirt, and then they'd wear their sari over it. So throughout the day, they are bleeding into basically a dhoti. And that would absorb any of the menstrual blood that they're bleeding, no matter how heavily or not. Doesn't show through their clothing. And it's out in the field where there are limited animals, but also it would be, because it's kind of low hanging and whatever, it would dry fast in the heat. Or in the wet season, that's when there would be slightly problematic, because it would remain moist. So they'd have some issues around that. But for the most part, they're working in the fields, they work the whole day. They didn't have the luxury of any red tents or green tents. They just worked right through. And they don't have a day off, the Lord's Day or whatever. They work 7 days a week. So even today, in the rural areas, not even long ago, today, in 2021, they still do that. And when some health workers try to introduce them to pads, they said, and where are we going to get it next week? Which is the same thing that happens here in the city. So you have all these donations, give a girl child menstrual products, whatever, and they are throwaway items. So they're filling up our landfills. They don't decompose easily. So plastics involved in there retain their form for 500 years, you know. So we're looking to how do we have sustainable menstruation that is relatively cheap, but our whole culture is now moved so deeply towards convenience that anything that makes you do a little more extra work, you don't want to do it because we are so accustomed, you know. But if you have nothing, now this is kind of marketed at the moment to the poor or to those that can't afford the recurring cost of having menstrual female hygienic products, pads and tampons, which we're using really, cotton is very expensive. It's water draining. It uses a lot of water to create cotton fabric. So the cotton that you get off and that it's made of, the absorbency for your menstrual products, it's a high cost. Okay, but if they have things for men, it's the same thing, they have it less. So the tax on that, because it's a specialized niche market, they charge a premium. And so then they get the public involved and say, you know, some girls in these areas, we want to give to these schools, donate. But when you donate, it's not a one-source donation. You've got to make a donation every single month, and it's just filling up our land sites. And this is where you start looking at what is sustainable. What did our parents do before they had cotton pads and cotton absorption tampons? What did they do? And we're like, oh, that is so gross. No, it's not. They had pads that were made of fabric. They were used and washed and reused again and again. This was not a recurring cost to you. All you had to do was wash it properly and give it enough sunshine. And the sunshine ensured that the pathogens were killed off. And oh, you know, no, we don't do that because we want the convenience of not having to deal with where do you put that when you're done with it? When are you going to clean it? You got to wrap it to whatever. We don't want to be inconvenienced. And now even baby nappies, nobody is using cloth napkins. So that mentality of this use and throw away is where we are really hitting the road here. And so, you know, like, the luxury of having toss away things. It doesn't, on earth, we have one earth. You can't, there's nowhere to throw things away. If you consider the earth a one room, and you take your tampons and your messy pads and your baby's napkins that are made from non-recyclable stuff, and you stuff it in a corner. And it's not going to disintegrate for 500 years. You got to start thinking, soon there's going to be a massive mess that is going to spread to the rest of that room. But because the earth is a lot bigger, we're not thinking in those terms. And we're using resources and we're messing up the atmosphere, air, water, soil, we're just messing it up. And so this is when I'm quite passionate about sustainable ways of dealing with and hygienic ways of dealing with your menstrual emissions kind of thing you need.
Yeah.
Yes.
So Gaurangi, if I'm correct, you have some alternatives to share with us. And
yes.
Before we get into that, let's talk about the supposed orgasm we get from a tampon.
Okay, even you that didn't have really uncomfortable or painful periods, Rasa-sthali, and other women who have fairly normal, your hormones are as unsexy as they're ever going to get in the entire cycle. You are the least interested. You are least interested in being accommodating. This is why you seem bad-tempered, where the rest of the time you will tolerate other people's nonsense. But when you're going through a period, your hormones shift to see things with a level of clarity that the rest of the month you don't really have. Because the rest of the month, during your fertile years, you are trying really hard to accommodate. You are the peacemaker and the peace bringer and the accommodator. So you want peace at any cost.
Gaurangi, I have to interrupt you. You said something really interesting. which is something that, does not exist today. You said that we are at our most cognitive, most clear-minded.
You have the clarity of mind, yes.
Yeah. Now I have to tell you that people call that period crazy.
Yes, because you are no longer doing what they want you to do and what they expect you to do. If I come to you and I am the way I am and I remain that way, the unchangingness of me is considered consistent and therefore valuable. If I shift on you and I stop giving you what you want and you don't know what to expect from me, that change is unacceptable. And Denise is not the person she used to be, and they mean that in a negative way. And when people get older, they're kind of like, I don't have to put up with your nonsense. Well, I learned this pretty early, so I was like, yeah, and once a month, you're given an opportunity to examine things from your perspective without having to take everybody else's needs into accommodation. And when you become menopausal, that kicks up into high gear. And so remember, all the progesterone, estrogen, et cetera, is working within your body to create families. So you're going to have babies. And in order to have your baby, you need to make sure that they are safe and that they are in an environment that keeps them whole and safe. And so you become an accommodator because you're taking care of that baby and its welfare going forward. So that's why women are more accommodating than men. They argue less. I know men will say, no, they do. Women that are arguing with you now, they're arguing about your nonsense. That's my story and I'm sticking with it. But
just to interject,
less aggressive.
You move on.
They're less aggressive. Although women do nowadays.
Sorry, Gaurangi, Giri wants to interject. Just give
just a small thing. Is you saying that we're the most cognitive at that point, and it's because our focus is on ourselves and our body and what we need at that time. And other people cannot handle the fact that we're thinking constantly about ourselves and our health.
It's not constant. The behavior that you exhibit
during that period,
And during that period, when you become menopausal, you kind of reevaluate what you've been giving up. Because when women do things as a matter of course, if anybody does things as a matter of course, it's taken for granted. And therefore, it is also expected. And then it's not questioned anymore. It's your job to do. And when you withdraw that, and they are now not getting what they used to get from you for free, without questions asked, they protest. Oh, she's going through menopause, or oh, she's on a period. When actually that's a time in your life where you start to reconsider. And you're like, actually, you don't deserve this level of giving that I'm doing for you. I'm not getting anything in return. And so once a month, you get to practice that intuition where you see things as they are instead of working really hard to make them as they should be. And so when you find out that women in their 60s are now getting a divorce, I don't need to accommodate you anymore. My children are grown. My grandchildren are safe. I'm not going to sacrifice myself at the altar of your accommodation and tolerate your bullying. Right? In some cases. Look, there are lots of wonderful men who have been wonderful husbands, and there are lots of bullying women who are like really hectic and unnecessarily so. And whenever we are disagreeable, it's because we are responding to a need that we have. There's lots of women that are super selfish. They kill their children so they can run off with the love or whatever. There are lots of types of people. But generally speaking, nature of women, we're talking in generalities here. The nature and what you are going through during your hormone changes drops in certain levels and raises other hormone levels. And then you respond in a more self-reflective way. Who am I? What am I doing here? What's my function? What's my worth? And that's where you go into this idea that you go on crazy during your menopausal. Shall we shift to just taking care of your body and taking care of the earth at the same time? Does anybody object?
Yes, please, let's proceed to that.
About 10 years ago, I came across, I was not born in a time when we used any fabric or anything. The standard was purchase and throw away solutions. There were pads that were stick-on, that had wings, that had no wings, that were super for night, so they were super thick for super absorbent days, and so on and so on. So the variety was there, but all of them were the same. You use them once and you throw them away. And you use them for a certain amount of time, and when they were at your next visit to the toilet or the bathroom, you would get rid of it. right? And of course, when I was at school, though, we had an incinerator. That means you throw them into the incinerator, pull the lever, and they would burn, right? It was creating greenhouse gases and carbon dioxide, etc., but that wasn't a concern at the time. That's how you got rid of them. There were bins collecting these things. Then later, as we moved through life, the throwaway culture became even more so. So even if you're having like a bit of a messy day, you have panty liners for the days where you are not menstruating, and they also throw away. And like we spoke about earlier, these were building up and creating a huge ecological disaster in the horizon. Once those landfills are done, what happens to it? If you've got plastic tucked in there, very little can grow. There's lots of poisons, there's lots of bleaches, etc. The second thing is tampons. So pads, most girls use that. They introduced it first. A lot of women prefer it throughout their lives, and they have no intention of shifting to anything else. And the idea of inserting anything to the body is considered taboo. It'll break your virginity, etc. So first, let us understand virginity is the act of penetration with a man, or maybe an object or something. But breaking your virginity means that you're no longer virginal, not because something like a tampon, which doesn't touch sides, was inserted into you. It is the hymen being broken through penetration by a man. If you had sex and your hymen does not break, that is the membrane between your vulva and your uterus, okay, around the cervix. If that is broken during horse riding, you're still a virgin. But the test in the old days was if you bleed on your wedding night. Now, some people have very elastic hymens. So that elastic hymen, they can have sex, penetrative sex many times, and it still won't break. For them, sex is quite painful, and it remains so until it is sometimes surgically opened or surgically broken. And they can remain so-called virgins for the longest time. If you have anal sex, you're no longer a virgin, but you still have your hymen intact. So having a hymen present does not determine whether you're a virgin or not. As having a sexual act performed on you or with you, that determines whether you're a virgin. So this idea of the hymen is the telltale sign. And if you bleed during sex, that is incorrect. And it has caused a lot of strife in women's lives. So using a tampon when you are bleeding will not make you demoniac. It's not an act of sex. It's not an act of, you're not pleasuring yourself. It's an act of hygiene. The pad allows for circulation, a certain amount of oxygen to circulate, and that oxidation starts to rot the blood, basically. And that's why you get a whiffy smell that's smelling slightly of blood, right? That's what it is when you're wearing a pad. If you have a tampon, you can start with the smallest tampon and change it far more regularly. The tiny mini ones, I promise you, they really are not in any way intrusive. But those stop, there's no interaction with the atmosphere. And because of that, there's no smell, and it takes a longer time to break down, which means that it's not starting to collect pathogens and it's not going to oxidize. So tampons are, in my opinion, now remember this is just my opinion, every woman should empower herself to make the choices about her health. And menstrual health is one of them. If you keep inserting things into your body to absorb it like toilet paper that has been exposed to a toilet's atmosphere where bacteria, etc., has settled on there, people have handled it, etc., that's going to guarantee you some infections. Remember, we are moist, it is dark, and we are covered. So you want to have clean, sterile things being used. So the takeaway and throwaway options are far more expensive for the planet, for the environment, and for yourself, and it's a recurring cost. We grew up in cities and we were able to afford it, and we didn't even think twice, we just paid the price. And now we are finding out that there are whole environments, there are whole communities of people who can't do that, they miss school, etc., and that is recurring cost just because you're a girl, just because you were born into a female body. It costs you your education in some cases. So that's more towards, especially in South Africa, the rural areas, all over the world, this is of course a problem, but especially in South Africa, where we do have the means of coping with this. There are two solutions that I came across for if you want to have a hygienic menstrual solution that you are not going to throw away, and you're not going to pollute the earth, and you're not adding to the problem. So sustainable solutions, one is the cup. So it's called the moon cup or the menstrual cup. Do you mind if I show it? Okay. This is the moon cup. It's made of sterile medical grade silicone, right? Now it is incredibly flexible. If you could just see this, how small it can be, right? Very, very tiny. There are smaller cups than this, much smaller. And this, now you must remember, the vaginal opening is about this long, and the rest going upwards is now towards your uterus. So people, like gentlemen who think that they have, if they have larger penises, it's more pleasure. No, we have quite short canals to move within. So this is about as long as it gets. This is one of the biggest cups that you have. So if a girl is wanting to use this, the silicone lasts for years and years. And if you're using it, absolutely, if you have one cup and you're using it for every single cycle, it'll last up to 5 years if you're taking care of it. You need to wash it properly and it needs to dry. Most people have 2 cups, so they can swap them out when you're cleaning one or the other. If you clean it properly, you can insert it immediately, right? Lots of people don't like this because they still within themselves have a preference for, if I'm not married or if I'm not, I'm still a virgin, I don't want anything to be inserted into my body. It's still their right. This is not informing you what you should do. These are just options, what you'd like to maybe do, right? So if you can, you get to choose. These are quite expensive. This medical grade silicone cups, 2 of them, they are inserted, so they're wrapped like this, and they're inserted, and then as far as your vagina will allow, the opening will allow, it will open to that. So just say you're not really, this is the largest one, remember? This is the largest. So you have smaller ones, and it'll open to what your opening can accommodate. And because it presses against, it's larger than any vagina is, and this, of course, you've just given birth. But so that will open, and because it is bigger than the opening, it stays stuck. It doesn't shift, it doesn't move. If you insert it properly, it will stay there, you do not leak. Now, we bleed about 2 teaspoons of blood, okay, at a time. And this will accommodate a lot more. So this prevents it from leaking out of the body, and it's very easy to clean. All you need is like some good sunlight soap. Do not use scented fancy soap. Use proper, just sunlight, something with the least amount of ingredients in it that causes you least irritations, okay? So this one is useful for those who are comfortable with insertions, and it is completely and absolutely, it'll prevent any leakages, and you can have it on for a long time. If you have a very heavy bleed, of course you may need, or you just feel uncomfortable, then you change it. So it's a really, if you're going to use this for 5 years, they cost between 299 and 500 Rand. That's a lot for a upfront payment, for a, you know, putting down capital. And so one of the companies, the Mina Cup, they ask for donations from the public to assist, right? And in the cultures, our rural communities especially, they have lots of taboos around inserting anything into their bodies. So this is not suitable for everybody, simply because they don't want to insert things, which is your right, and you can choose not to. So this is a sustainable solution. Also, the silicone, after it's been used and it's looking a little tatty, when you pull it out, it's pulled out by this little tag. Super strong, super hygienic, no contamination. And that's why it's really great. It's still very expensive, very, very expensive. And I do think unnecessarily so, but like I said, there's a donor program working with this. So if you'd like to look into it, it's the Mina Cup, M-E-N-A, Mina Cup. And there are other varieties, but do be careful not to have plastic that is not silicone and not of medical grade. So that's why we are pushing or promoting rather. You'd rather have a known brand, then you know that there's no chances of any strange leakage from the actual plastic into your body. Okay, so
can I ask a question? Is it biodegradable?
No, not biodegradable. It's silicone. Silicone is one of the toughest plastics known to man, but it is
Okay.
remoldable. That means it's recyclable. Plastic, every bit of plastic that was ever made from the beginning of time, from the first invention of plastic, is still on the planet today. Every bit of plastic. This is why we don't like plastic in terms of sustainable developments on the planet. So silicone, while I don't like plastic, it is really great for a really long-term solution in a once-off purchase. Okay, so that's the MENA Cup, MENA, the MENA Cup, and they do have a sponsorship program for those who can't afford them. Another sponsorship program is Dignity Dreams. They are all over South Africa now. They still depend massively on donations. What they do is they make a sanitary pad. So this is external to the body. You apply it to your underwear. So some girls don't have underwear. In some of the rural communities, they don't have underwear. And so they had nothing. So what the ladies do, they have boy pants, boy panties, you know, the boy, what's it, boy, it's the boy cut.
Boy leg, yeah.
Boy leg. So it's a full panty, and it has very short little legs going slightly onto the thighs, right? So that gives a good, nice fit. There's nothing skimpy about it. So this is the pad. That's the underside. This is the inside. It has SABS approved towelline cloth. It has a layer of plastic, also plastic, but you do need it to be completely waterproof, right? And this part wraps around the underwear, and it is holding onto your underwear there, and it's held in place. So it's fitted against the skin, and you use it until it becomes soiled. And if you are in a bathroom and you've soiled it, they also give you little bags in which to put them in. And then you get a big bag, and it just looks like colorful, like all this beautiful fabric here. Okay, this fabric, if somebody's holding a drawstring bag with that, nobody asks questions. It doesn't look like some sanitary thing that says, my time, or, you know, it's not pink or little red droplets or anything that gives it away. So those girls who wish to be discreet can pick up their little swing bag and go to the loo without anybody asking questions. So this is it's completely sustainable. What's also really nice about this company is there's very little plastic used. It can last up to 3 years, depending on how anti-stain you are. Like some women don't want anything that's stained against their skin. Also, women who use bleached cotton in their tampons are endangering their health because there are chemicals there that can cause toxicity and so many other things. But for this, it is pure cotton, like real cotton. These can be made of polyester cotton, the sides, and then it's joined with studs. What the model looks like is they have hired local persons. So usually ladies, but men as well. And what they do is they are given the pattern. They are trained how to sew it. They have to meet a certain standard. And you get paid for each pad that you make to standard. If the standard is not met, your loss. They're not going to buy the pad from you. The pack that they give the girls, usually in rural communities, and some very, very disadvantaged urban communities, peri-urban, that kind of thing, is that they have 3 of these, 3 panties, a waterproof pouch, and drawstring bag. And that's the gift. And these are normally donations. This costs 140 Rand, or the last time I was donating individually, it was 140 Rand. It may be something like 180 now or something. I will check out on the price, but you can look at it. Dignity Dreams, www.dignitydreams.co.za. This is an amazing company. They give people jobs. They make sure that the product is completely up to scratch. All the parts are in working order. They have quality control. They purchase it from the people directly. So those people get money. There's no boss in charge of them, making them work ungodly hours, etc. And yeah, so they give local people work. Some people work at home, some people work in the community center or the church or whatever, but all around the world, all around South Africa, they are doing this, and I'm really loving this particular model because it's job creation, skills creation, high quality products. It is examined for any flaws, and added to that, going forward, they do huge donations. They huge donations. Most of all those donations go to the people who it is intended for. So there's very little profit making. There are a few jobs within the community, the person who's the CEO and et cetera, et cetera. A lot of those people already have jobs and don't draw a salary, but one or two of them do, and they earn very little. So I'm really loving that company. So these are the two solutions that you can use. These last up to 3 years, sometimes 5, depending on how heavily you bleed or how anti-stain you are. Because as you know, blood's pretty hard to take out, and you can't put hot water on it. You've got to put cold water, otherwise you cook the blood into the fabric. And yeah, those are the two solutions that I am particularly fond of. If there are others, I'd love to hear about it. But Dignity Dreams, quite a lot of people know about it, and they're pretty enthusiastic. So if anybody would like to become a supporter, where you give a little bit of money every month, that goes towards really making sustainable solutions where women are taken care of. They don't have to miss school, they don't have to be embarrassed, and they don't have to live in shame. They don't have to be using unhygienic things or rags or something, you know, where there's no way to dry them or clean them. So I would appeal, if any of the public and ourselves as a women's collective would like to make a donation on a monthly basis. I do already, but I'd be happy to add a little bit more to our collective kitty. Are there any questions around this?
So Gaurangi, I just want to remind all our viewers that these details, we will put it down in our comments, yes, so you can find it there. So don't worry if you've missed it from Gaurangi's comments here.
Also, they have telephone numbers if you'd like to know more. They have websites that you can visit. Really interactive. Yeah. The lady we were supposed to have during Women's Month, Sharon, we changed the date a few times too many, and yeah, we decided not to keep jerking her around. She is quite a busy lady. So yes, and there are lots of other solutions outside of our norm. If we can just, you know, do things intelligently with a little compassion, or we can save the earth and ourselves and help a fellow sister. Oh. Any other questions, comments?
So oh, sorry.
No
I know, just to add on to what Gaurangi was saying about Dignity Dreams, I think also for those that are perhaps interested in donating, they also don't have to do a monthly contribution if that's too much. They could also do it once off.
Thank you for that. Yes, I like the idea of it being ongoing.
Consistent.
Yeah, but if you can't, and you know, as little as 10 Rand, towards one of these packs for young girls who are really struggling using mud and feathers. Talk about tarring and feathering you.
It's a phenomenal initiative though, so thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah, and any other, if you'll have any other solutions that come up. I know that in India they were making washable tampons. Unfortunately, they expand too much, so the reuse is kind of limited. So I wouldn't advise those. And the compactness of them don't allow for airing much, you know, circulation of, and the drying and the getting rid of pathologies is not great. So I don't even want to bring it up actually. Don't go looking into it, it's bad for you. It's like, yeah. So I think that kind of wraps up our hygiene discussion.
Thank you so much, Gaurangi, for that, and I hope, I trust that it's informative. And for those of you that are going to look at these sustainable ways, I so wish that I had been. It was my time, you know. These things, they didn't exist when I was menstruating, but it would have been just something like such a big, like just the idea that, you know, all the plastic that I've used in my lifetime still exists out there is. Yeah, it's really something. It blows your mind to think about the, you know, that plastic that we've created out there.
Yeah.
Sorry,
So,
I would.
for how many years do we do this? Some people up to 30 years, 40 years menstruating in their lives. It's a lot of plastic.
Yeah.
Best. Thank you.
Thank you, Gaurangi, for those extremely practical and useful information. I think we are ready to close, but I'd like to go around the room and just ask for some closing comments. And if I can, please start with Mathura, if you have any closing comments or thoughts.
All I can say is, I'm so glad we brought this out to the open. And there are so much more choices, like Gaurangi was saying today, that you can use and be conscious of the planet and the environment. And as you were saying, Rasa-sthali, we didn't have those choices when we were menstruating. And hopefully I don't become a witch, but a wise old crone.
Thank you, Mathura. Kalpa-latika, any closing words from you?
I think just as a young Vaishnavi, I'm thankful to all of you for us having started and initiated this conversation. I think that it is something that is so pertinent. And I really hope that going forward, that the conversation doesn't end here, that it carries forward into our friendship circles, our devotee circles, our family circles, and potentially even into, future generations to come, because Mother Mathura mentioned that her son is very open-minded and liberal, and he doesn't see it any differently. And I hope that that filters into everyone that surrounds us. So yeah, thank you for this.
Thank you, Kalpa-latika. I think that rather than hoping it, we just got to make those moves to educate, like Mathura Mandala has done with rupees. So, that kind of thing needs to happen more. Giri, this was your baby, your topic. What are your concluding words? And please let us know if you're satisfied with what went down here today.
I am, I never expected this conversation to expand and be explored so broadly. So I'm very, very excited for what's to actually come. And I hope that, just like Kalpa-latika said, that these conversations continue with people. I think the hope of this whole starting the conversation is to say, blood normal, and I think Libris it is that have this that has this whole, like, they've started this blood normal campaign where you just, all blood is blood, let's just make it normal, and that the topic and the word menstruation and period is no more, in relation to fear and shame. I just hope by that that us talking about it as a normal thing, I hope it's normalized, the words that we use, and that it's reframed in some way, and that it's helped you to understand a little bit, even for younger girls that are watching this, to just understand a little bit about what menstruation actually is, in terms of education. And if you're still confused after this, please, speak about it. Please go to your teachers, go to your moms, go to your sisters and aunts and friends, and speak about it, ask about it, so that if you didn't start menstruating yet, you can know more about it and how to help yourself. And as Gaurangi, I'm just, in fact, for myself personally, I'm really excited, because for a long while I've been very confused about the menstrual cup, and I've wanted to know more about it, and to see it, and how to even use it. And I personally am inspired to actually try it out, because I've never tried it out. So personally, I really, really want to try that option out, and I'm really excited about that. And just my concluding my concluding remarks as such is, I keep thinking about a while ago when there was the the emergence launch like meeting that was had or conference that was had on Zoom, and Pranada, Mother Pranada actually said this thing that still sticks with me, and it was such a contradiction to menstruation, you know, because she said, as women, all we want to do is we also just want to use everything and every part of our bodies to serve Krishna. We also want to do that. And that stuck with me, and it made me realize, like, this menstruation sometimes can actually stop us from serving Krishna to our fullest. And that's where I want to bring in this letter that Srila Prabhupada once wrote to well, I have it here, and I will also share it you know, in the description where you can find the link to the letter. But he wrote a letter to Amsu Das, who's you know, his wife and him wrote together in the same letter, and she had asked about, you know, I don't know what to do when I'm on menstruation. You know, she's heard all these things, obviously, from the temple and from living in the ashram. And then she asked Srila Prabhupada personally, you know, what do I do? I want to cook for Krishna, but what do I do when I'm on my menstruation? And Srila Prabhupada's response was quite an amazing one. And he spoke about, he says, according to the Smarta Vidhi, woman cannot touch the deity during menstrual period. And just to give you a little bit of information about the Smarta Vidhi, I think maybe Mathura Mandala, you can explain what Smarta Vidhi actually is, just briefly.
Yeah, the smarter Brahmins, you know, followed a very strict set of rules where you couldn't do so many things. Where women couldn't stay in temples, you know, women don't get Brahmin. In fact, anybody coming from a Western culture are considered malechas, and they, you know, you don't give them Brahmin. So that's a little bit that I can add about Smarta Vidhi.
Yeah, and so Srila Prabhupada says that, you know, this is what they do, like, this is how they treat women during their menstrual period. And he says, but Goswami Vidhi, which is actually what we practice in ISKCON, it allows for it. And even though he says, yes, it is better to not do it, but he says the one thing is that seva can never be stopped for any reason. This is also for the cooking. And then he says, I hope this meets you in good health. And that to me was kind of almost an affirmation that I tell myself, that, you know, I don't want anything to stop me from serving Krishna. That whether it's someone's negative energy, whether it's emotional turmoil, whether it's being challenged by this whole, you know, menstruation that we have to go through as women. But if you just attempt to serve with determination, and that's how important devotional service is, that it's just about developing your relationship with Krishna, and your period shouldn't stop you from developing your relationship with Krishna. And even Srila Prabhupada is saying that seva should not be stopped for any reason. And yeah, it's just like an affirmation and kind of a confirmation to me that Krishna is going to accept me because he made me this way, you know. So yeah, that's my closing comment. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much, Giri. That was really beautiful. And thank you for the quote. For all the skeptics out there, there's something to look at. You know, Giri, as you were speaking, it reminded me that for those of us that have our cultural ideas, like let's try to we can honor them on ourselves, but let's not try to push it onto people. Let's turn to the Shastra. Let's take shelter of Srila Prabhupada's words. Let's not talk about tampons being demoniac with no substantial basis to that understanding, because that is misinformation. So let's try and make our way back to true information and understand the Acharya and, you know, how he saw people engaging in service. So for those of us that are listening, if we're directing young women, then please, you know, make it a point to become educated and set aside your own understandings and do the research, do the work before you say something like a tampon is demoniac, which can be really damaging, because it just sounds crazy, actually.
Yeah, don't blindly follow just everything you hear.
Yeah. And it's okay if you were misinformed before, and you know, it's okay to learn new things. That's the whole process of bhakti. We're meant to go deeper, and our ideas are constantly evolving, and it's okay to change our minds. So, you know, you can always approach these topics with fresh eyes. Gaurangi, please can we hear your concluding words?
Oh, I'm dawdling. One thing we mustn't forget is the gentleman within our sphere of influence and interest. Try not to demonize men, because patriarchy, as much as it was thrust upon us, is thrust upon them as well. And a lot of their misinformation, even though it may serve them more than it does us, they shouldn't be demonized, because they know even less about how our body works unless they're gynecologists or doctors, etc. But they are also largely misinformed, and they're also subject to peer pressure. And there are a lot of genuinely wonderful male out there that are wanting to partner with us and be our friends and comrades and help us in this creating worth out of womanhood. So let us not leave them out of the conversation in our discussions and our willingness to educate. And I'm looking forward to becoming a miserable, grumpy old crone, where I'll just get my way and I can wear purple and red if I choose. So, Mathura, no.
We actually bought a Punjabi for you that was purple.
It was purple. Yes, I still have it. It doesn't quite fit me as well as it did when we bought it 20 years ago. But yeah, I'm going to wear purple and red with yellow earrings if I choose, because that's what crones do. They do whatever they want. They're really empowered, and let's hope that we can all empower ourselves first before trying to change the world, because that's not something we can do, but we do have power over ourselves. So let's make our lives better and our sisters with us. And it has been lovely speaking to you all. I'm so glad that Mathura started this little group. They've served us well. Thank you, Mathura.
I know I'm only 25, but I want to get on the crone train too. I want to wear whatever I want.
Slow down, Girisha, slow down.
Let me tell you something, guys. It's the place to be, I have to say.
You've got to earn your stripes first.
Yeah. Not everyone's admitted.
So everybody, thank you so much for your time, your honest sharing and open discussion. This is episode 5 of the Protection Paradigm, where we are discussing menstruation. We may have another episode later this year, but we're not going to speak about it just yet. Thank you all so much for spending time with us and taking the time to hear everybody today. And we will see you on our social media. Until then, Hare Krishna, and thank you so much.
Hare Krishna, everybody.
Hare Krishna.
Hare
Hare Krishna, everyone.
Thanks for tuning in.